Ever heard of an American being called Gemma or a British person being called Hunter? Maybe you have, there's a slight possibility, but probably not. When it comes to what we name our kids, there are some similarities, but there are also a lot of differences across the pond. So many people have commented on my name over the years, mostly people who have never heard of it before, which is most people. It's Kaylyn, spelled K-A-L-Y-N. If you look it up, it comes up as American in origin, though I don't actually know that many other Kaylyns in the US or otherwise. It's definitely not a popular name. Caitlin is much more popular, but Kaylyn is just one of the many American names that you really wouldn't find in Britain, and there are a lot of British names that aren't popular in America. There are also a couple of names Americans pronounce differently than British people, which drives them absolutely crazy, as well as some interesting naming conventions that differ between both countries. So if you're a name nerd or ever wondered if anyone in America is called Benedict, spoiler alert, not really. Let's get going. Now, the first thing I wanted to do is compare the top used US and UK names going back about 100 years. Would this immediately show us any differences? The USA separates their top lists by gender, while the UK information I could find was mostly combined, so it's easier to start with the girls' names, and we can see that two of the top UK girls' names, Elizabeth and Sarah, can also be found on the US list. When it comes to the male names, we also have similarities. David, James, Joseph, and Michael are found on both lists. On the US list only is Robert, John, William, Richard, Thomas, and Christopher, and on the UK list we have Alexander, Charles, Edward, Daniel, and George. However, none of these immediately stick out to me as names that wouldn't be used in the other country. They're all pretty traditional and normal names in each country. Nobody's going to raise an eyebrow, so I think we need to dig a little bit deeper. To do that, I started researching baby name databases guided by evidence already pulled together by people on the internet with too much time on their hands and a real fascination for names. I've come up with my ultimate list of British names that aren't commonly used in the US, or at least they seem like very British names to us in the States. These are Imogen, Arthur, Teddy, Lucy, Louie, Millie, Rosie, Lottie, Felicity, Freya, Georgia, Gemma, Alistair, is that how you say it? Pippa, Gareth, Poppy, Maisie, Harriet, Florence, Orla, Marnie, Callum, Bronwyn, Beatrice, Polly, Tabitha, Tilly, Rupert, Nicola, Fiona, Eleanor, and Louise. And on the topic of Eleanor, I've seen lots of things online that with a British accent, it kind of has a less of an R at the end, whereas I pronounce it Eleanor. So comment below, how would you pronounce that name? Now, names I definitely know I can pronounce are the American sounding names that are not popular in the UK. These really don't sound as good. We have Chad, Nate, Madison, Blake, Tyler, Cody, Hunter, Mason, Brad, Troy, Landon, Hank, Casey, Harper, Cooper, Parker, Kennedy, McKinley, Brittany, Courtney, Caden, Braden, or Hayden, Sean, Drew, Corey, Shelby, Dustin, Lincoln, Mitt, Trent, Colt, Gage, Weston, Kaysen, Colton, Braylon, and Emberly. Now, you might know somebody with this name in the country that I said it's not necessarily popular in. I'm not saying that nobody in the UK or US has the name that's on the opposite list, but these are just names that don't seem to be as popular in one country as in the other. And also, both of these lists could go on and on. I haven't even included the most unusual or unique names from both countries that are really out there, but you can get a feel for how normal sounding names for each country do differ. Next up are some differences in pronunciation. I am definitely going to butcher some of this because I'm still not sure how I'm saying it incorrectly, but we're going to go there. The first one is this name, Craig. Now, if I were just to pronounce this as an American, and I'm embarrassed too because I'm gonna get so many comments. I would say Craig. And so many people think that this is really strange and that Americans say this. And like, they think this word is not supposed to rhyme with Greg. But in my accent, it does. It's Craig. In the UK, I think you're supposed to like draw it out more, but I'm not even sure if I can say it. I think you're supposed to say like Craig. I can't do it. I can't do it. I don't know. I say Craig like Greg, as most Americans do. I will try and find something online that shows you what it sounds like. I don't know how to say this name differently. Okay, one that I can say differently is this name. In the US, we would almost always say Anthony. We would pronounce the H and we would say Anthony. I got to the UK and I saw this name spelled and people kept calling this person Anthony. And I was like, I don't think that's his name. You're missing the H. And turns out in the UK, typically it is pronounced Anthony as opposed to Anthony. The next one is this one. It's typically a masculine name in the UK and you would say Noel. But in the US, it's typically a feminine name and we would say Noel. We also have some differences with this name and this name. So it typically in the US would be Cara and Clara, but in the UK, typically they would say Cara and Clara. Now, another one that I do not know how I'm saying so incorrectly, according to most people on the British internet, is this name. I say Graham, and I think where I'm going wrong in some people's eyes is I'm supposed to say like Graham. I'm supposed to just draw it out more. So it's not Graham, it's Graham, Graham instead of Graham, maybe. But in America, we say Graham. That's how I would say Graham. There are people who have that name in America and their name is Graham. Whereas I think in the UK, their name is I can't even do it. Graham? Is that right? Comment below. Some other important differences that have been noted to take into account when thinking about naming trends are, on the whole, the US tends to do more surnames as first names. So like McKinley for a girl, or Kennedy for a girl, or Parker or Cooper for a boy. They're just kind of surnames turned into first names. The US also has a lot more spelling variants typically. We have less of a naming tradition. Like our country is newer and there's just a lot less history and a lot more people these days. So we have more of an immigrant culture with names from all over the place and a bit more emphasis on individualism. So it means you get a lot more spelling variants in America. Typically, that can seem relatively off the wall. And like I said, we have a much larger population, so there's just like a greater chance that things are gonna get weird. It's also interesting what's considered a classic name or a recent name in each country. I found a conversation online about how, for instance, the name Julia is seen as a much more dated name in the UK than in the US. So like actual fashion, different names, different fashionable names can come in and out of popularity at different times in the different countries. Now on that note, here is a fun game we can play in the comments. If you are British, let me know the most American sounding name you can think of. If you're American, let me know the most British sounding name you can think of. If you're neither, tell me more about your name and where it comes from and if it's popular in your own country. Thanks very much for watching and I'll see you next time.